This is BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. My name is Brian Runciman. The title is 10 Ways to Make Your Website More Accessible. And we're going to be listening today to Nigel Lewis, who's going to present to us. He's also controlling the slides. Can you move on for me, Nigel? One, please. So this is what it's all about today. What you'll learn, why digital accessibility is important, why you should take notice of it, and some simple tips on how to approach accessibility. It can be a fraught subject at times. There's a balance of different requirements. You will notice on the equipment that we have that you can post questions. We would very much encourage you to do that, please. There's a little orange arrow at the top of the control panel on the software. If you go to that and put it on, you'll see a little grey box further down, questions. Please put questions in there for Nigel. Anything we can handle. We already have one or two in, so that's lovely. And I'll hand over now to Nigel, who's just going to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about the presentation today. At the end, we will take all the questions that we have. If some fit in to the flow of the discussion as we go, I'll try and put them in, so I will see all those. And I'll hand over now, please, to Nigel.
Thanks, Brian. So welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to speak to you today. So I'm Nigel Lewis. I'm currently the CEO of a charity called AbilityNet. And our mission as a charity is to try and make technology as accessible as possible for disabled and older people. And I've been with the charity nearly 11 years now. And part of the reason I got interested into this topic and the whole need of accessibility is I have a very disabled son, so I firsthand could see and understand how technology can really transform and help his life. So why should we worry about accessibility in the first place? So there are currently, we believe, 13.9 million people here in the UK with a disability, and that equates to around about 650 million people worldwide who have a recognised disability. And in addition, we have an ageing society with the over 50s as the major growing demographic, as I'm sure you're aware, and within that, the 75 pluses are the biggest growing age group in our society, not just here in the UK, but around the world. And many older people acquire age-related disability, such as issues with their vision, their hearing, their dexterity, and their cognitive abilities. So this all means that there's a very large group here in the UK and across the world who will struggle or actually simply be unable to use websites and apps if they are not accessible. And if we are trying to drive people to self-serve and use the technology, then we need to make sure that it is accessible for everybody. Now, it's important to understand that actually accessibility can impact everyone. We often think of permanent disabilities only, so people that we can see who have a disability, such as those who might have lost a limb, or they may be in a wheelchair, or they are blind and are therefore walking with a cane or a guide dog. But actually, those people that we would classically say are disabled are often, in pure number terms, the smallest number of people who have a disability or struggle with using inaccessible technology. The largest groups are those that you actually don't know and can't see. People who have, for example, dyslexia or cognitive and learning impairments or mental health issues. And impairments can also be temporary. They don't have to be permanent, but they are no less limiting in being able to use your website. So somebody who has a broken limb, for example, may be temporarily impaired. Or if you have a migraine, which might last, and symptoms might last for several days, you might not be able to concentrate or even use that screen. Or what if simply you have lost your glasses? And this is a real personal thing. If I haven't got my glasses, I cannot use my laptop or my mobile phone without it being accessible. And we can also be disabled or impaired by the environment in which we want to use our technology. So we've all probably struggled with trying to use your mobile phone outside in the wonderful sunshine that we're having right now, but also trying to use the technology perhaps in a busy or noisy environment. So there are many impairments and there are many situations that can be addressed and helped by looking at accessibility. Now I'm going to focus down on some simple tips and hints about how you can address some of those issues and therefore make your website accessible to the millions of disabled and older people here in the UK and beyond. And I think it's important we try and dispel a myth right now. Making your website does not have to be expensive and it doesn't have to be difficult. Like all things with technology, if you can think about it while you're designing and developing your website and your app and doing these things up front, then it is simple and it's very cost effective and it's very easy. Like all things in technology, if you don't do it up front and you're then trying to retrospectively fit things, then yes, it does become more difficult and more challenging.
So, Nigel, as you just brought that little subject up, perhaps I could just interpolate slightly there. We've got a poll that we'd just like to run with the folks that are attending today about their organisation's view of accessibility. So, bearing in mind that there's that in the back of people's minds that perhaps it's too expensive or something, I'm just going to launch this poll. So, if anyone would like to take part in it, please do. It's just a multiple choice, 3 options, and also add questions. And sorry for interrupting. Please do carry on.
No, that's fine. It'd be good to get some people's thoughts. So, what do we need to think about to get started? And I obviously don't know who's on the call, but we're starting at the very first steps of what are some of the big issues that will definitely mean that you are not accessible. So the first thing, and it might seem very simple and obvious, is but can you access all the functionality that you are trying to get people to use or engage with on your website? You would be surprised how many times we see that it's actually impossible or extremely difficult to access the functionality to complete a task. Secondly, if you were only to use the tab key to try and move from field to field, so the tab key on the keyboard, is the sequence logical and obvious, or does it hop all over the place? And actually linking to that, if you were to use the tab key, could you actually follow your progress and know where you are on the page? And I guess, again, linking to that, so they're all interlinked through navigation, is could you use your site without your mouse? Many disabled and older people can't use a mouse to navigate, so you need to ensure that they can manage with just a keyboard. That's why tab is so important. But equally, they might be just wanting to use their voice. So perhaps after this broadcast, maybe you could try using your own website, put your mouse to one side and see if you can actually navigate and actually carry out a transaction or find a piece of information just using the keyboard and the tab keys. If you look at your website and the answer to any of these fundamental questions is no, then you are simply not accessible. And there is work that you will need to do to correct the sequencing, the use of the tab key, highlighting where you are on the page so somebody can physically see and follow the flow of how to navigate your website. But before you think that it's only about navigation, there are some other quick and simple checks that you can do to think further about accessibility. Do you have content that is moving, such as video or rolling pictures that can't be paused? So if you're on your website, you have no control over the scroll. Often you see at the top there'll be scrolling images, or there is a website with an embedded video that automatically starts, and you have no control over those at all. If there is no control, this can be very disorientating and confusing for many. Also, we obviously like to make our websites look attractive and informative and engaging, and there is absolutely no reason why an accessible website cannot be attractive and engaging. but do your pictures have alternative text descriptions that describe what the picture is? If someone has, generally if it's for people with visual impairments, but they might be using a screen reader, the tool that reads to them on the screen that they cannot see, and it will automatically read out what the picture is when it's in context. But and it will only do that if you have described it. So you need to describe what that picture is. And please never start the description with, "This is a picture." The tools announce it as a picture, so you don't need to describe every single picture on your page starting, "This is a picture." Do your videos have text for captioning? Again, this is another important element, and actually the software that's available these days can actually really help you with auto captioning. This has come on leaps and bounds over the last year. But again, if you've got video with obviously embedded voice, people with hearing impairments will not be able to engage with those videos. And one of the big areas that we see a lot is text color, which is often too faint and with not enough contrast, so making the text and the background blur and not be distinguished enough. A very simple example, it's not for a website, but I don't know about you, but my credit card has the long number along it is in silver on a very pale background, and I struggle every time to read that color contrast because it is so awful. And finally, and again is an important one, which is, do you actually have an accessibility statement on your website, which should clearly state what your intention is about making your website accessible. It should be clear on what is, and perhaps more importantly, what is not accessible. It is quite reasonable for you to own up to that there are inaccessible web parts of your website, but you should point people to an alternative of how they might be able to contact you or carry out that transaction. And finally, it should allow people to inform you of the issues that they find to help guide you to the problems that they might be having. Now, any of these will prevent those millions of potential clients, both here in the UK or across the world, from accessing your goods and services. And as we all know, users are fickle, and disabled and older users are just as fickle as everybody else in the online environment. So if they struggle with yours, they're going to go and find somebody else's really quickly to see if there's an alternative that they can interact with. So that's just a really brief highlight of the kind of 10 most important things and where you should start. There's obviously a lot more that you need to do to make your site accessible. And the absolute place to go is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that abbreviate to WCAG, WCAG, if you ever talk to any of us in this space. And they are held on the website www.w3, where the 3 is a digit, is a number, .org. And that is the
Sorry, Nigel. I was going to say it's a good opportunity to launch another little poll there about the W3C guidelines. I'm just going to do that while you're talking.
Okay, please do. So these are the internationally recognized guidelines which set out these 4 guiding principles around accessibility. They have existed for a considerable amount of time. We're on version 2 of the guidelines, and they are truly internationally recognized. So the new EU directive that has come out for accessibility of public sector websites is based on these guidelines. You will find them truly used across the globe to set the standard of web accessibility. So by following these, you are embarking into a recognized international standard for web accessibility. And it provides 3 levels of compliance, what they call A, AA, and AAA. As a minimum, though, you need to be, if you're going, and I hope everybody on this call is bought into the fact that you should do this, you need to focus on, as a minimum, AA compliance. single A is not good enough. There will be components in the AAA standard that might be useful, but to be honest, going for AAA is tricky and challenging. So AA compliance is certainly the way to go. And of course, if you do get stuck on the AbilityNet website, which is www.abilitynet.org.uk, if you navigate to expert resources and then digital accessibility resources, you will actually find a plethora of information available to help you understand how to make your website and mobile apps accessible. So there's links, more links there to the WCAG content guidelines, there's stuff about the law, there's links to free tools that you can use to check your website, you can find free color contrast checkers, so there's all our blogs, etc. So there's lots of information there that can help you to understand what you need to do. And then my final slide, I quite like this quote. It's interesting that accessibility and the recognition of technology for how it helps disabled and older people is not something new, considering this quote was taken from an IBM training manual back in 1991. And I do really like this quote. For people without disabilities, technology makes things easier. For people with disabilities, technology makes things possible. And that is still as true today as it was back in 1991. So I hope this has whetted your appetite. It may seem daunting, but it doesn't need to be. Please don't be put off from making a start. I often talk to people going, oh, well, if I can't do it all, I'm not going to do any of it. But actually, that's the wrong attitude. You won't be able to do it all at once, so please do make a start, because simple things can truly transform how the disabled and older people can use your online presence. And I wish you good luck.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel. That's been very informative. We appreciate that. So we've had some questions come in. We'll come on to those. We've also had 2 polls now we've managed to do. So we'll reveal the results of those with bated breath and get Nigel's view on that as well. Nigel, can we ask you the first question we've had in here? Little sort of I suppose a little bit of modern web speak. Is responsive design the enemy of accessibility or an aid to accessibility? I don't know how you feel about that
Yeah,
issue.
I can give that a go. So I would say it's an absolute aid to accessibility, but also most importantly the usability. So what we have to remember is that accessibility and usability go hand in hand, and you need to do both. So making sure that your website is responsible, because disabled people and older people use different devices just like anybody else. So yes, you've got to be, if you're not in the mobile presence and the tablet presence, then yeah, you're excluding yourself. So absolutely. And there are some separate guidelines published by the BBC around mobile accessibility, and the W3C, who own the Web Content Accessibility Standard, will hopefully soon be publishing mobile guidelines as well to help us all.
Thank you. Now, PDFs have got a bit of a bad rap, perhaps quite rightly in some cases. So we've had a question in here. Can PDFs ever be accessible?
Yes, PDFs can be accessible, absolutely, and they can be accessible today. Notoriously, they're not, because people do not think about making them accessible. And the same is true for Word documents. Word documents are generally a bit more accessible out of, as we write them. But actually, you can make your Word document as inaccessible as your PDF document. So following some basic rules around structure, layout, fonts, colors, font sizes, etc. You have to work a little bit harder in PDF, but that applies to any content that you produce, basically, whether it's a PDF, a Word, or a PowerPoint. Alternative text, as I was talking about, for images, etc. It all applies. So
Okay.
Use PDFs, but just make them accessible. And you can do it. There's an inbuilt accessibility checker for PDF as well, so it can help
Yes.
you.
Well, now here's a specific question about websites. Two particular issues. Actually, they're back to the top buttons. Are they acceptable? So you get to the bottom of the screen. There's often a little graphic, isn't there, or ident. Is that an
Oh, what,
accessible
to
way of
go
doing
back to
things?
the top?
The
It
top
is,
content, yeah.
yeah, as long as the button has been coded properly so that it underneath it doesn't just say button 1, it says back to top. So that if somebody who has a visual impairment, for example, is using that screen reader, so the screen reader will announce that you're on focus with a button, and it doesn't just say button 1, which doesn't help anybody.
No,
Yeah, that's fine. A button or a link, but it's the same thing. They all have to be accessible to be used.
the question from me, Nigel, is there an issue around the teams that design these things not having a broad enough base in their own diversity in the makeup of the team to actually see things from different points of view?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Lots of people will tell me that they've done user testing, and they will have done it with I don't like this phrase, but quote normal people unquote,
Mm.
and they won't have brought into a diverse group of people with disabilities, people who are elderly, so they're not getting a truly diverse group, and therefore they're not getting the feedback. And part of the problem is they don't know to do it. So I always say
Yeah,
people don't maliciously create an inaccessible website. It's done out of not having the knowledge, and that actually most of what they need to do is really, really simple.
that's
Um,
interesting.
so
I
this is
found it.
why these sorts of things are so important, to educate people, just to understand, to ask the questions, and start to get the knowledge to build it in right up front.
Yeah, I mean, something I hadn't particularly thought about, the point you made there, people that just have some sort of temporary issue to face. Perhaps we should get people on development teams that have broken their arm, or not that I'm encouraging that, of course, but
Yes, you probably don't want to encourage to break your staff's arms, but what you can do, and what we do with lots of people, is you can put them in situations using some tricks about how experiencing that temporary disability. So you can buy glasses, for example, that will simulate different visual
mm,
impacts.
mm,
So it would, impair your vision, so you can only see out of a very small part of the glass or stuff like that. You can buy things called arthritis gloves. So you can put these gloves on which simulate you having arthritic hands.
yeah,
Um, you can fundamentally take the mouse away, as I said earlier, and say, see if you can use your website. You'll be
yeah, interesting
amazed how
approaches.
often you can't. So
Mm,
there's lots of simple things you can do to try and simulate what other people are experiencing, so you put yourself in their shoes more.
yeah. I've had a question from Mark. Am I allowed to share this presentation with another member of BCS who is not listening to this presentation? I think we're okay to say yes to that because we're going to publish data as well on YouTube. So please share far and wide. This is valuable information, isn't it?
Oh,
Perhaps,
absolutely.
perhaps I'll just tell you the poll results. Nigel, just get your feedback on these. I asked, are organisations well acquainted with the W3C guidelines? I got 53% yes, so that's good. 27% no, and 20% haven't heard of them before. Is it? Would you say that reflects your experience of talking about those guidelines with others?
I'm quite impressed that 53% said yes. So
Okay.
I'm quite encouraged by that. So we've obviously got some good, knowledgeable audience on the call.
Well,
Uh,
BCS members,
but
you see. Oh, yes.
absolutely, they're very knowledgeable people. But 47% basically said no or didn't know of them. So
Mm,
that's still a massive challenge. And if those BCS members are working in big organisations, they could very well be, you know, unintentionally, disadvantaging some of the really digitally excluded people that we have in our country.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Now, the other question I asked, what view do organisations take of web accessibility? For some reason, the percentages add up to 110%, but let's just see if we can. Not too sure why that's happened, but let's just rough idea. 41% said it's a key consideration, which is great. 18% it's perceived as being too difficult, and for some reason, 53% say that intentions are good, we need to up our game. But I think what we can take from that is probably the majority see good intentions, but some shortcomings in how we actually do it, which I'm sure you'd agree with based on what you said today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously the 18% was it that said it's too difficult. We need to go and convince them that actually it's not too difficult. Yes, if you're going to retrospectively fit it, like anything else, it is difficult. But actually, if you can start to think, because we're developing stuff all the time, you can make these small improvements. And then the 53%, how can we help you to up your game, so to speak, because it truly does. And actually, it makes your site more usable. People will like it. They're generally, accessible sites are easier to navigate, to interact with. So not only does it help those disabled and older people, but generally our experience is that everybody else quite likes them as well. So, don't just think you're doing it for 13.9 million people. You're doing it really for everybody because you're improving the experience.
Yeah. So I think the lessons we've got today from your very helpful presentation, Nigel, thank you, is that this requires just a little bit of thought at various stages of planning, particularly actually if you can do it at the start, it's going to be better. But actually as projects carry on and upgrades are made, these are the sorts of things that need to be taken into consideration. And just to open our eyes a little bit, if you'll pardon the pun, to those that have different levels of ability in whatever way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just remember that there's a lot of disability you can't see, if you'll pardon the expression. So you just need to be broad in what you're thinking about. So, yeah.
We've had one last question in, which I'll pose to you, and then we'll conclude. How would you go about retrospectively creating accessible websites? So I suppose that is about retrofitting, really, if we've already got something in place.
Yeah, so I would absolutely advocate start with the simple things that you can do, which will probably be driven if your site is templated. So if you can fix color contrasts, go fix the simple things like alternative text on pictures, look at the navigation, all of those simple things that will make an instant improvement, which they're not complex technically, they just need a little bit of work to go and look at and think about, and then move on to some of the bigger challenges, because it's amazing how the small, we talk about color contrast, it's a very simple thing, but it can make a huge difference to somebody's usage of your website. And then you can move on, because things like if you've got automatic moving images or auto start video, that might take you a little bit more effort. But yes, my advice is always to start with a simple low-hanging fruit and learn from that.
Yeah, lovely. Well, look, Nigel, can we thank you very much? Can we ask you to put it on the last slide, which just promotes our next webinar? But can we thank you very much for the very insightful presentation you've given us today. We've appreciated the questions from those listening in as well. Thank you very much. Please continue to send ones in for future ones. The next topic is rights and responsibilities in the digital world. We'll hear from Andy Phippen, the Professor of Social Responsibility and IT at Plymouth University. And thank you for listening. And Nigel, thank you once again.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Appreciate it.